FPD has asked me to speak for a few minutes on the global and domestic economic and investment outlook. We've obviously come through 3 extremely difficult years for the world economy and indeed for the Irish economy. It's been very tricky on financial markets, on investment markets. The second half of last year, we saw most of the developed economies experience a significant slowdown in economic activity, largely on the back of the ongoing legacy from the subprime mortgage crisis, but also the markets started to believe that the government debt levels built up in a number of developed economies were quite simply too big, and this escalated into what has become, a serious debt crisis in the Eurozone. Looking at the world economy as it stands today, economic momentum in the emerging economies led by China is doing pretty well. The US economy, having dipped towards the end of last year, has in the first quarter of this year shown pretty impressive signs of recovery. The US economy is not out of the woods, but at least it is back on a reasonable growth momentum, 2 to 3% growth, which is pretty decent, and that is likely to be sustained over the next 12 months or so. The Eurozone economy is really the major source of concern. Countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and indeed Ireland are, quite simply smothering under an excessive debt burden. Serious fiscal austerity has been forced on those economies, and that's going to remain a feature of the economic landscape in those countries for the foreseeable future. So that part of the Eurozone, I think, will continue to struggle for the foreseeable future. However, I'd be a little bit more upbeat about the core Eurozone economies. The German economy is starting to show reasonable signs of economic recovery at the moment. Business confidence is picking up, consumer confidence isn't too bad, and indeed the manufacturing indices are back over the 50 level, signifying expansion. But having said all of that, I think the key theme in the global economy and indeed in global financial markets over the next 12 months will undoubtedly be the ongoing Eurozone debt crisis. Greece will remain centre of that equation. I do not believe that the bailout deal that was recently agreed for Greece will represent the end of the line for that country. I would think that in the next 12 months, Greece's continued participation in the Eurozone will come under serious pressure, and I certainly wouldn't be shocked if this time next year Greece was no longer a member of the Eurozone. And that clearly has implications for the ongoing stability of the Eurozone. My sense would be that those difficulties in the peripheral economies will not be sufficient to blow the Eurozone apart. I think it will survive, but I think the key growth in the Eurozone for the next couple of years will be out of the core economies such as France and Germany, and that clearly will set a pretty challenging backdrop for the whole Eurozone. In terms of the Irish economy, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever there is only one approach that the Irish can take. We've got to keep the head down, we've got to continue to try and restructure the Irish economy. That does imply we've got to continue to get our public finances back into order, because regardless of the Eurozone debt crisis, regardless of the difficulties in the banking system, Ireland over the last decade built up a totally unsustainable public finance situation. We're spending too much money running the country, we're taking in too little in taxation. So we've got to keep the head down and continue to push ahead with the restoration of order to the public finances. And the other key part of the agenda, in my view, has got to be to continue to try and push down the cost of doing business and improve the competitiveness of the economy. And that is already, and I think will increasingly reflect itself in continued strong foreign direct investment into the economy and indeed a strong export performance. The biggest challenge for Ireland obviously will be trying to restore domestic demand. Business investment spending is still being hampered by a dysfunctional banking system. That process of restoration of a functioning banking system is going to remain difficult and is going to take some time from here. The second issue is trying to restore some level of consumer confidence, get consumer spending again. I also think that is a slightly long-term prospect. So over the next 12 months, I think the Irish economy will be characterised by a decent export performance, decent growth in foreign direct investment. Domestic demand is likely to remain very, very weak for the foreseeable future. In terms of investment markets, I have to admit that I'm a little bit surprised at the buoyancy shown by international equity markets over the last 3 months. And in fact, every piece of news at this stage, be it negative or positive, tends to elicit a positive reaction from equity markets. So I'd have some concerns about that. On a 2 to 3 year view, I believe global equity markets will perform pretty strongly, but I would expect over the next 3 or 4 months a setback in markets, and I suppose that should provide a buying opportunity for those people who have missed the boat and didn't get on board earlier this year, because still there's a lot of money out there in investment markets that is currently sitting in cash, and the holders of that cash are dying to get back into markets again. I probably think now is not the time. If we get the setback over the next 3 months, I think better opportunities will present themselves. But the longer term perspective on equity markets, in my view, is reasonably compelling. So in overall terms, the global economy, despite the extreme negativity out there, it's not too bad. The emerging economy is growing strongly. The US economy is doing reasonably well. Parts of the Eurozone and the core doing reasonably well. Obviously, the key uncertainty surrounds the peripheral economies that are labouring under excessive debt, namely Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and to some extent Ireland. Thank you very much.